Okay, now for Hebrews 11, the great faith chapter. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Joseph Benson commented on this. The meaning of the clause seems to be that faith is a confidence that we shall receive the good things for which we hope, and that by it we enjoy, as it were, a present subsistence or anticipation of them in our souls. Faith is a great hope in which can stave off this fear of death. The stronger your faith, the less you'll fear what everyone dreads, death. The saved man has a great anticipation and hope of heaven and all its glories, while the lost man only has a dread of nothingness or hell, or is possibly hoping, though not in the same elevated state as we do, in some fiction dealt by him by other religions. And many people claim that Islam has the same type of faith as we do. No, sir. They do not have the same certainty. You see, we look to Christ, the perfect one accepted by the Lord. And he says, "And whomsoever loves me will be with him and the Father for all eternity." But what does Islam teach? Muslims believe they get to paradise by living religiously, asking Allah for forgiveness and showing good actions in their life. These good actions will be rewarded on the last day. You see, and in that, there is such an uncertainty that they cannot have. How can you acquire certainty like that? Because we do not live righteous lives. We sin. Our very thoughts are sin. So if one is trying to live pleasing to, let's say, Allah, then how do you know where the standard is? You don't know where's the line, where's the one that you cross or fall short of. You don't know. Whereas our hope doesn't rest on ourselves, but on the one in whom said, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me," Christ speaking, of course. "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. And whither I go, ye know, and the way ye know." And what is that way? Well, it's doing good works and making sure that you obey this law and don't eat pork. That's not the way. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father. No man gets into heaven, but by me," meaning but through me. So now we can see how the things in which we hope for, we have faith as evidence for that. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Verse 2, "For by it, that of faith, the true faith, the elders obtained a good report." Speaking of those of the Old Testament, in whom had this unwavering confidence in God and His promises and His strength, not in our own. "Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear." In essence, that the worlds were made by the word, order, or command of God is one of the unseen things which cannot be known but by divine revelation. The apostle, therefore, doubtless refers to the Mosaic account of the creation in Genesis 1. As the creation is the fountain and specimen of the whole divine economy, so faith in the Creator is the foundation and specimen of all faith. It really boggles the mind whenever I hear that a Christian believes in the theory of evolution. I used to. But what a lacking of faith in God. They say, well, the starlight, it's too far out there and everything. The earth was made first, and God controls the speed of starlight. He controls all things, and this was thousands of years ago that all of this happened, that God, He was doing miracle after miracle after miracle, and they put a limit on God. These people in whom believe in evolution, and they're still Christians. But we know by faith that the things which are seen were made by someone unseen.
Part of the format for the debate. So which question?
I want you to fill in the story of the rest of the beginning of the universe. God, spiritual matter, impact on material matter.
Okay. So 2 questions. All right.
Go ahead.
All right, your question, where did God come from, assumes that you're thinking of the wrong, obviously it displays that you're thinking of the wrong God, because the God of the Bible is not affected by time, space, or matter. If he's affected by time, space, or matter, he's not God. Time, space, and matter is what we call a continuum. All of them have to come into existence at the same instant, because if there were matter but no space, where would you put it? If there were matter and space but no time, when would you put it? You cannot have time, space, or matter independently. They have to come into existence simultaneously. The Bible answers that in 10 words. In the beginning, there's time. God created the heaven, there's space, and the earth, there's matter. So you have time, space, matter created, a trinity of trinities there. Just, time is past, present, future. Space has length, width, height. Matter has solid, liquid, gas. You have a trinity of trinities created instantaneously. And the God who created them has to be outside of them. If he's limited by time, he's not God. The guy who created this computer is not in the computer. He's not running around in there changing the numbers on the screen, okay? The God who created this universe is outside of the universe. He's above it, beyond it, in it, through it. He's unaffected by it. So the concept that a spiritual force cannot have any effect on a material body, well then I guess you'd have to explain to me things like emotions and love and hatred and envy and jealousy and rationality. I mean, if your brain is just a random collection of chemicals that form by chance over billions of years, how on earth can you trust your own reasoning processes and the thoughts that you think? Okay, so your question, where did God come from, is assuming a limited God. And that's your problem. The God that I worship is not limited by time, space, or matter. If I could fit the infinite God in my 3-pound brain, he would not be worth worshiping, that's for certain. So that's the God that I worship. Thank you.
Verse 4, by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. And it's with this and throughout the chapter that we're going to be seeing how it's justified if you say, well, how does faith come into that equation? So many just believe that faith is believing that God exists. Well, I believe that God exists. And if you ask somebody if they're a Christian, yeah, I'm a Christian. 90% of America's Christian. But I doubt 5% are truly Christian because they don't know the true faith. They have no idea about it. It's a way of life. Your every thought is on God, or your every thought, at least in some way, pertains to God. What will God think about this? And that's faith. It is a way of life. David Guzik, right off with his example of Abel, the writer reminds us that faith is not necessarily rewarded on earth. Remember, he was killed for his faithful act. He gave the animal sacrifice, the blood sacrifice, whereas Cain, he brought the works of his own hands, that of the fruit, and that was unacceptable to God, because without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins, and this animal sacrifice was to be a type of Christ. And God said, no, you will not detract from the tradition of giving blood sacrifice because it's pointing to a far greater thing, Cain. And so you offering these fruits and everything, that's unacceptable. But Cain wanted to do his own thing. Anyway, he gets mad at Abel after doing that, and he kills his brother. It's the very first murder in the Bible. But God himself testifies to the righteousness of the faithful. Abel's blood still speaks to us because it says that his blood spoke from the ground. Now that's in a figure, but it also points toward how Abel was still alive, even in the afterlife, because he had faith in God. Verse 5, by faith Enoch was translated, that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him, raptured him. For before his translation, he had this testimony, that he pleased God. And real quick, Chuck Missler, he used to talk about this. This is amazing. The first key names mentioned in the scripture, from Adam all the way down to Noah. And you got Adam, which means man, Seth, which means appointed, Enoch, which means mortal, Canaan, which means sorrow. So you got all these names, then you come down to the seventh one, and that is Enoch. Now, Enoch is believed to be representing the church. He was the first person ever raptured up to heaven. And he had a son named Methuselah, and we're going to come to the significance in that, the oldest man to ever live, almost to 1,000 years old. But Notice right here their meanings. Man was appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching his death will bring the despairing rest or comfort. Isn't that something? The Gospels right there in the first key names of mankind. But anyway, back to this. Enoch representing the church, Methuselah representing the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Verse 6, but without faith it is impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Meaning that the God in whom you have heard of and have faith in, you must believe that he is the only God, that he is the supreme being, the eternal one, no other besides him, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him, that you will receive reward from him. And the greatest reward, the greatest gift is, of course, Christ. But then we get eternal life, heaven, glory forever and ever with him. Verse 7, by faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, like the rain, it had never rained on the earth. And Noah's told it's going to flood the whole world. Talk about an event. By faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world, and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, that of Canaan, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing where he went. By faith he sojourned or journeyed in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. So Abraham, representing the faithful, he was led to a place he had no idea where he was going. He had total reliance upon God. But if you'll notice really quick, the types of Christ already mentioned, Adam had to leave paradise for his wife's sake, just like Jesus had to leave heaven to get a bride. Abel was killed by his own because he was pleasing to God, just like Jesus was killed by the Jews. Enoch ascended and is still alive because he walked with God. Noah preached and made a means of salvation by wood and nails. Kind of a type of the cross right there. Abraham led his family to Canaan, and through barren Sarah came God's people by God's grace. Verse 11, through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. From Abraham came all of these, and whom wasn't even supposed to be able to have children with his wife. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Did not Jesus say that his kingdom is not of this world? Therefore, if we're to be with him, it's obviously not going to be of this world until he establishes the millennial reign. So we go home after death, implying that this isn't even our home, and yet people, they dread death. And I don't blame you. The flesh, it doesn't want to die. It'll fight that until its very last moment, and it'll be frightened and scared, but you must have faith. Charles Spurgeon once said, there are two types of people in this world, those that fear death and those that know their Bible. Verse 14, for they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, Abraham offering up Isaac, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Abraham no doubt was perplexed by this. He said, Lord, this is my only son. That's how he was the most precious thing that in the whole world. He was a miracle child, literally a miracle. But God was testing Abraham to the full, as he was a type of all of us that would come after, the faithful. Would you give up even the most precious thing for me? Now remember, God stopped him, and he said, don't do it, but he waited till that very last second. But what was Abraham's thoughts during this? Well, we don't see it in the Old Testament, but we do read about it right here in verse 19. Abraham accounted that God was able to raise Isaac up, even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. He thought, well, if I sacrifice him, God's going to resurrect him, a type of Christ. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel, and gave commandment concerning his bones. If you'll notice with all of these, they're looking into the future. Their faith is giving them a present confidence about things to come. If you'll notice, the atheists, they're so in the moment. They're not forward thinkers, hardly at all. Verse 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. That is, they believed that God had a great purpose for Moses. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. It's at this point Charles Ellicott noted something very important. When Moses slew the Egyptian, who was smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren, he in act refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, and chose to suffer affliction with the people of God. And by that, just as verse 26 reads, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. To which Jameson Fawcett Brown noted, that is the reproach which falls on the church, this reproach of Christ, and which Christ regards as his own approach. Remember, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Whenever he just got done with the martyrdom of Stephen. He being the head, Christ being the head, and the church, the body. Israel typified Christ. Israel's sufferings were Christ's sufferings. Verse 27, by faith Moses forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured, as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians, essaying to do, were drowned. You talk about faith, you'd have to have tremendous faith to have crossed the Red Sea. It was about 9 miles across, and it would have taken probably about a day to cross it, and the entire time, at least hours and hours to cross it. There was 2 million people, we believe, and their animals, their cows, their lambs, and their livestock and all of these. It would have taken hours. So your faith it has to be strong. Now, granted, they were in between a rock and a hard place. You got Pharaoh and the Egyptians on this side wanting to kill you and enslave you. And then you got this water. There's a way to go. And that's really a type of whenever Jesus touches down and we with him on the Mount of Olives in his second coming at the Battle of Armageddon. He touches down on the Mount of Olives and it splits and it makes a way for the Jews to escape that are in Jerusalem. But that's the completion of the example of Moses right there. But before we move on, could this not be one of the primary factors in why Moses was so exalted? Think about the life of Moses. He spent 40 years in Egypt as royalty. Then he rejected it by killing the Egyptian. And then he lived as a poor fugitive for 40 more years. His 40 years of royalty would have allowed him to receive education in all areas, not available to the Hebrew slaves, especially those pertaining to leadership. The next 40 would have taught him life in the wilderness and being a shepherd. So Moses, specifically from the time of the foundation of the world, was chosen to be set apart and then brought up in this unusual way, apart from his brethren, uniquely even. And he's put through this 40 years of royalty, then 40 years with the Midianites in the wilderness, right around the places where they would go, so he would know that land very well at 40. I'm not even 40 years old. I'm 38 years old. So this is a long time. All of this before the encounter with the burning bush. Verse 30. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. Remember, she was inside of Jericho, and she was spared, saved, her and her family. And it's very important to note how this woman inside of Jericho had faith in God. Now, how in the world did anyone outside of Israel have faith in God? To her and to her countrymen alike had come the knowledge of what the Lord had done for Israel, specifically noted in Scripture. She recognized from these signs and acknowledged the supremacy of the Lord, and she cast in her lot with his servants. The men of Jericho continued in their disobedience and perished. All of them had heard about what had happened to Egypt, but they didn't fear. Matter of fact, God's name went throughout the whole world, and he's done this since the beginning with Adam, all the way up to Noah, all the way down through the history of mankind. God has chosen specific times in order to make his name famous and well known throughout the whole world. So much so that thousands of years later, here in the last days, we are still speaking about those things in which happened at the very beginning, even at this very study. It's amazing. Verse 32, And what shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, and of Barak, and of Samson, and of Jephthah, and of David also, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Mainly pointing towards a resurrection of a better life than that they were to lose, and a higher reward than they could have received had they not endured these afflictions. Well, you're going to get another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You're still going to face that same anxiety, okay? Seeing the greater their sufferings, the greater would be their felicity and glory hereafter. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. And it is believed through tradition that the prophet Isaiah, he was actually sawn in half. But of these, of whom the world was not worthy, they wandered in deserts, and in mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us, outside of us, should not be made perfect.